It began with silence, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that screams. A deep, unsettling quiet hovered over Buckingham Palace just moments before the world was hit with a statement that shattered months of mounting speculation, royal ambiguity, and whispered betrayals. On the palace balcony, there were no waving hands, no warm royal smiles, just a closed door. Behind that door, King Charles III, Prince William, and Princess Anne stood as a united front, not to celebrate, but to condemn, not to protect, but to expose. And what followed next would ignite global firestorms. Meghan Markle was no longer protected by royal privilege. Her legal immunity, a veil the monarchy had long extended to her, shielding her from scrutiny and shielding the monarchy from scandal, had been officially revoked. It took exactly 1 minute. 1 minute for the Royal Communications Office to issue the statement to international press. 1 minute before news outlets across continents began flashing breaking banners in scarlet. And 1 minute before United States authorities, already on high alert, moved in to act on sealed financial and identity fraud warrants they had long been forced to bury under diplomatic immunity. Before the hour was over, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex no more, was reportedly taken into custody. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But what really happened? What led the Crown, often measured and cautious, to turn on a former royal in such an unprecedented public way? What secrets, schemes, and silent wars had unfolded behind the palace gates in the lead-up to this thunderclap moment? To understand the gravity of what just occurred, we need to rewind. Not to the wedding bells of 2018. Not to the Oprah interview. Not even to the Netflix documentaries or the Spotify deals. We must go deeper. To the fractures that began the very moment Meghan stepped into the monarchy. Because this wasn't just a revocation of protection. It was a royal declaration of war. From the outside, the decision might appear swift and merciless. But from inside, it was a culmination of years of tension, dossier compilations, behind-the-scenes investigations, and unbearable silence. According to insiders, King Charles had been receiving quiet alerts for over 6 months from both domestic and international agencies, warning of potentially compromising information involving Meghan. At first, the palace brushed it off, wary of triggering more explosive headlines. But then came the evidence. Documents, transfers, identities, associations, alleged financial deception tied to the very causes she once fronted. And most alarmingly, a disturbing paper trail that allegedly predated her marriage into the royal family. Still, the palace hesitated. Because in the royal world, perception is power. And acting against Meghan would not only risk public sympathy backlash, it could also fracture their already fragile relationship with Prince Harry. But Charles, William, and Anne knew one thing. Inaction was no longer an option. There comes a point when protection becomes complicity. And for the first time in modern monarchy history, the decision was made not to protect the reputation of the institution, but to preserve its integrity. What followed was not a press leak, but a royal edict, cold, calculated, and deeply personal. It came directly from King Charles, with the explicit support of his heir and his only sister. The carefully worded statement acknowledged that Meghan Markle's status as a royal had been suspended in practice for some time, but that, as of now, any legal immunity she previously held, whether symbolic or procedural, was dissolved. That meant no more diplomatic cushion, no more shield from cross-border warrants, no more favor from governments previously asked to delay or dismiss. It also meant something even more chilling: accountability. By late afternoon, media vans lined up outside federal court buildings in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., with reporters scrambling to confirm the unconfirmed, that U.S. authorities had in fact already been prepared for this moment. Sources from within Department of Homeland Security and the IRS began leaking whispers of years-old sealed investigations, all reportedly paused due to Meghan's diplomatic status as the wife of a British prince. That status, however, no longer applied. Her passport still bore the title, but it no longer held any weight. And that was the opening law enforcement had been waiting for. No official image of the arrest was released, but multiple eyewitness accounts placed federal agents at a gated estate in Montecito, where a tense and rapid interaction unfolded. There was no camera crew, no makeup team, no podcast host waiting to record. Just men in black suits, papers in hand, and one question: are you Meghan Markle? To those who had watched the Duchess transition from beloved royal bride to polarizing celebrity advocate, the image was staggering. This wasn't just a celebrity takedown. This was a reckoning. For years, Meghan had controlled her narrative, speaking out against racism, sexism, and the cruelty of the royal machine. And for many, she became a symbol of resistance. But this moment wasn't about narrative. It was about justice, truth, and the consequences of actions long shielded by titles and connections. Inside royal circles, however, the response was more complex. While King Charles and Princess Anne were reportedly relieved that the matter had been lifted from the royal burden, Prince William was visibly less at ease. Sources suggest the heir struggled with the emotional impact this decision might have on his brother, Prince Harry, who had not been notified prior to the announcement. For all their public frostiness, William knew this would not just hurt Harry, it would humiliate him. And yet, the king had made it clear, family feelings were not to interfere with institutional duty. The crown, he reportedly said during a private meeting at Windsor, cannot afford to be held hostage by past mistakes. Perhaps the most haunting part of this whole drama is not the swiftness of the action, but the silence that followed. Neither Harry nor Meghan released a statement. Their official representatives were unreachable. Even their closest media allies declined comment. It was as though, for the first time since their dramatic exit from the royal family, the world had turned, and they didn't know what to say. Because this wasn't just another headline. It wasn't another interview, another deal, or another war of words between the Sussexes and the palace. This was the system itself rejecting the immunity it had once offered. This was the monarchy, slow-moving and traditionally passive, choosing transparency over loyalty. But what exactly were the allegations? Why now? And why did King Charles choose this moment, this week, this year, to drop the protection? The deeper we go, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just about Meghan's past. It was about the future of the monarchy. A monarchy facing generational pressure to modernize, to be accountable, and to prove that its values are not just words on parchment. And in this new monarchy, privilege without principle no longer holds. As the news ripples around the globe, one thing is certain: this story is far from over. The court proceedings, the legal filings, and the testimonies to come will likely expose more than just financial discrepancies. They may also unravel a tale of ambition, deception, and the hidden cost of escaping royalty while still wearing its cloak. So what happens when a duchess becomes a citizen again? When the titles are no longer shields but shadows? When the palace gates, once closed to keep her in, are now wide open, letting the law walk in behind her? Stay with us, because the next chapters will not only reveal how deep this scandal runs, but who else might fall with her. The day began like any other in the heart of London, with grey skies draped over the historic silhouette of Buckingham Palace and reporters huddled behind the wrought iron gates, clutching cameras and umbrellas in equal measure. But beneath the drizzle, a storm far more powerful than weather was gathering. Unbeknownst to the public, behind the palace walls, a carefully orchestrated moment of reckoning was about to unfold, one that would send seismic waves across continents. The announcement didn't come through leaks or whispers. It came with deliberate force, channeled through the official Royal Communications Office, and delivered in the most formal and damning of tones. At precisely 11 a.m., a message was transmitted to major media outlets in London, New York, Sydney, and Toronto. Meghan Markle was no longer protected by royal privilege. Her diplomatic immunity, a layer of legal shielding implicitly granted to her as a member of the royal family, had been stripped by direct order of King Charles III, with full support from the heir to the throne, Prince William, and his sister, the indomitable Princess Anne. This wasn't just a royal update. It was a calculated, stunning, and historically rare rebuke of a former royal by the sitting monarch. And it left the world scrambling for answers. Within minutes, chaos erupted across every major newsroom. Sky News interrupted its regular programming with a red banner alert. CNN broke in with a special report. BBC anchors, visibly shaken, began to speculate whether this could signal the beginning of formal criminal action. The announcement was a mere 3 sentences long, but every word was soaked in consequence. It read like a political obituary, clinical, cold, and decisive. The full statement, as confirmed by palace sources, was simple. His Majesty the King, in consultation with the Prince of Wales and Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, has ordered that all formal royal protections and privileges formerly extended to Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, are hereby and henceforth withdrawn. Any legal proceedings delayed or deferred in deference to the Crown may now proceed without further obstruction. The monarchy affirms its commitment to legal independence and institutional transparency. There were no pleasantries, no well wishes, no mention of reconciliation or understanding, only the stripping of protection and the declaration of accountability. It was a seismic shift in tone from a monarchy often accused of shielding its own. And for Meghan, it was a public unmasking of the highest order. But why now? Why this moment? Behind the scenes, royal aides were reportedly bracing for fallout, not just from the media, but from within the family itself. Prince Harry, Meghan's husband and the king's youngest son, was reportedly not informed of the decision until minutes before the press release was made public. Insiders say a short, impersonal call was made to his private secretary, not even to Harry himself, notifying him of what was about to happen. When asked whether he wanted to speak directly to his father or brother before the announcement was made, the answer, according to one palace source, was, "The king has nothing further to say." The emotional blow to Harry, already estranged from his royal relatives, cannot be overstated. This wasn't just a message to Meghan. It was a message to him that his choices had consequences, that his wife's actions, if found to be criminal or deceptive, would no longer be shielded by a family that had once embraced her as one of their own. Outside the palace gates, reactions were swift and polarizing. Some onlookers gasped in disbelief, others clapped. A few protesters gathered, some holding signs that read, "Justice for Meghan," while others hoisted placards demanding accountability, not titles. The emotional charge in the air was thick. People weren't just watching a royal scandal unfold. They were witnessing a cultural divide laid bare. For years, Meghan Markle's entry into the royal family had been a subject of both celebration and controversy. To some, she was a breath of fresh air, modern, outspoken, and unwilling to play the role of the silent royal wife. To others, she was a disruptive force, accused of exploiting her position for fame, profit, and political leverage. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the shadows. And now those shadows were being chased out into the open. As the cameras rolled and headlines multiplied, a chilling realization began to settle across the globe. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It had teeth. Multiple sources confirmed that the withdrawal of Meghan's royal privilege meant that dormant investigations in the United States, sealed and long stalled due to international respect for diplomatic protection, were being reactivated. In the span of an hour, subpoenas were reportedly dusted off, case files reopened, and federal authorities mobilized. The implications were enormous. Among the most whispered about investigations were those involving identity irregularities, financial misrepresentation during charity operations, and questionable transactions involving her business endeavors post-royalty. For years, critics and skeptics had pointed to the rapid monetization of Meghan and Harry's post-palace lives as potentially exploitative. But until now, there was no formal mechanism for recourse. Now, with the immunity withdrawn, the door to legal scrutiny was not only unlocked, it was wide open. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was one of tense resolve. According to a senior aide who spoke anonymously, the king had been preparing for this announcement for months. It was not a snap decision, the aide explained. It was agonized over, debated, and weighed against the potential damage to the family. But in the end, His Majesty concluded that the monarchy cannot be used as a shield for personal misconduct. That, above all, is what drove the decision. It was also reportedly Princess and who became the moral anchor behind the scenes. Long respected as one of the most disciplined and duty-bound members of the royal family, and had reportedly warned Charles weeks earlier that continued silence in the face of growing allegations would eventually taint the entire institution. "If we don't act," she is believed to have told him, "then we are complicit." Prince William, for his part, was less vocal but no less influential. Sources close to him said he had reached a point of private exhaustion over what he called the drama fatigue brought on by the Sussexes. He saw the move not only as a protective measure for the monarchy, but also as a necessary step to protect the next generation, George, Charlotte, and Louis, from inheriting a scandal-riddled royal narrative. Still, no matter how justified the decision appeared internally, its external shock was undeniable. Legal analysts began dissecting what it could mean. Could Meghan be extradited? Would the removal of privilege open up Prince Harry to similar scrutiny? Would this decision embolden other international investigations? Could the monarchy now face lawsuits for having provided that privilege for so long? And then, a more personal question emerged. What was Meghan doing at the exact moment her protection was revoked? Was she aware? Was she warned? Did she try to stop it? Though those details remain unconfirmed, one source close to her California residence said that Meghan had received unusual traffic at her Montecito estate just hours before the announcement. Vehicles bearing diplomatic plates, phone calls made to private attorneys, and an abrupt cancellation of her planned business Zoom meetings. There are even unverified reports suggesting that she had attempted to reach both Prince Charles and Prince William directly, only to be denied. The hours that followed the announcement were marked by eerie silence from the Sussex camp. No spokesperson, no tweet, no Instagram post. For a couple who had mastered media manipulation, the sudden absence of noise was deafening. And that silence, more than anything, signaled panic. Meanwhile, royal staffers began removing behind-the-scenes privileges tied to Meghan's prior status. Diplomatic clearances were rescinded. Private contacts with British embassies around the world were terminated. Coordinated messages were sent to former patronages she was associated with, informing them that she was no longer considered affiliated with the crown in any capacity. In the span of hours, Meghan Markle went from quasi-royal to private citizen, and not by choice. This was not just a news event. It was a global rupture, one that raised painful questions about race, power, justice, and accountability. Was Meghan unfairly targeted? Or was this the long-delayed consequence of actions left unchecked for too long? Why did the monarchy wait until now to act? And what does this say about their future strategy for managing scandal? Whatever the answers, one thing is certain: the rules have changed. And the palace has shown it will no longer sacrifice its crown to protect those who have abandoned its code. For those watching from the outside, the announcement felt sudden. A thunderclap out of nowhere. But inside the royal household, it had been building like a low, rolling storm for weeks. The elegant corridors of Buckingham Palace, often symbols of tradition and serenity, had turned into quiet battlegrounds of strategy, suspicion, and reluctant resolve. The mood wasn't one of rage or personal vengeance. It was colder than that. Methodical, administrative, as if the monarchy was preparing to perform surgery, the removal of something it had once tried desperately to integrate. It began, as so many royal crises do, with whispers, not among staffers or servants, but among advisors and private legal consultants summoned to the palace discreetly and off the record. Princess Anne, known for her blunt, no-nonsense disposition, had reportedly initiated a private briefing in early spring. A rare closed-door conversation with the Lord Chamberlain and two members of the royal household's legal advisory board. She had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the information she'd been presented through unofficial intelligence, including reports from British diplomatic staff overseas and the internal monitoring network still attached to Sussex-related charities and global engagements. To put it plainly, there were red flags. Lots of them. From questionable financial filings to curious backdoor communications with media entities, lobbying groups, and corporate interests that bore Meghan's signature or apparent involvement. Some of these concerns weren't new. They'd been raised before, quietly, and brushed aside in the name of family discretion. But the tone had changed, and reportedly told Charles that the situation had evolved beyond mere reputational risk. It's no longer about embarrassment, she said, according to one high-level source. It's about integrity. It's about the law. Charles, cautious as ever, was not easily convinced. His relationship with Prince Harry had already been battered to the brink of collapse, and any action taken against Meghan would inevitably drive a wedge deeper. But that's where Prince William entered the fold, not with emotion, but with paperwork. William had quietly commissioned an internal review of the monarchy's post-Megxit privileges, a document cataloging every existing protection, immunity, or favor still extended to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, despite their having stepped away from official royal duties. The findings were startling. Despite their self-imposed exile, Meghan still retained a form of informal diplomatic deference in several Commonwealth nations. She was still being shielded from certain legal inquiries, primarily due to a long-standing gentleman's agreement between the UK and the US, under which royal family members were treated as state representatives. This wasn't just awkward. It was potentially dangerous, because buried in the intelligence reports shared with the palace were allegations suggesting that Meghan, while enjoying the perks of royal association, may have been involved in misrepresented fundraising, data manipulation, and identity discrepancies, all of which could be considered criminal offenses under U.S. federal law if proven true. One of the reports referenced a complex web of international donations related to one of Meghan's women's advocacy campaigns, money that had moved through at least 3 jurisdictions, one of which was flagged as a tax haven. Another document highlighted questionable links between Meghan's business representatives and a now-defunct media startup accused of harvesting personal data from donors and subscribers. There were even notes, though unconfirmed, about identities being reused on multiple filings. In any other context, these would be red flags in an investigation. In the royal context, they were potential constitutional crises. The breaking point came during a weekend retreat at Sandringham. Charles, William, and met in private. No aides, no phones, just family. According to a source familiar with the meeting, the conversation was somber, the stakes high, and reportedly opened the meeting by saying, "We either act now, or we sit back and let the monarchy become complicit in a cover-up." Charles resisted. "She's still the mother of my grandchildren," he reportedly said, but encountered with a chilling reply. "That may be true, but so was Wallis. And we didn't give her immunity either." The historical reference struck hard. Wallis Simpson, the woman whose relationship with King Edward VIII changed the monarchy forever, had been similarly controversial. Her scandal led to abdication. Her title, though respected, came with limits. She was never fully embraced, nor fully trusted. Anne's point was clear. Personal sentiment could not override institutional duty. That night, the king reportedly made his decision. The process would be handled delicately, without spectacle, but the goal would be firm, to withdraw all remaining royal privileges from Meghan, effective upon announcement. The legal team was summoned. Diplomatic cables were prepared. Notices were drafted to be delivered to relevant Commonwealth governments and the U.S. State Department. But even then, care was taken not to trigger political complications. Meghan, after all, was a U.S. citizen. Her protection, in many ways, had always been symbolic, based on courtesy more than law. But symbolic protection, especially when reinforced by crown silence, had power. Removing it would be interpreted as an act of betrayal by some, justice by others. So the palace worked methodically. Everything had to be timed precisely. The statement, the distribution, the legal disengagement. Even the moment it would hit the news cycle. As the date neared, tensions rose across royal households. The staff was divided, some quietly relieved, others fearing what this could mean for the family's future. There were fears Harry might react violently, not physically, but publicly, that he would go on another media blitz, that Meghan might preempt the story with a carefully crafted podcast or a victim-centered op-ed. To prevent this, the announcement was kept secret until the very last moment. Only the core team of Charles, William, and 2 senior advisors knew the exact time. One of the most striking decisions was the deliberate exclusion of Prince Harry from the process. Not out of malice, but necessity. It was determined that informing him ahead of time could lead to leaks, interference, or desperate attempts to block the move through his US-based legal team. That risk was deemed unacceptable. The night before the announcement, the palace lights stayed on long past midnight. Private security was briefed, not for physical threats, but for the potential cyber onslaught expected once the news broke. The Royal Communications Office finalized embargoes with trusted media outlets. Digital assets, including archived pages referencing Meghan's royal protection, were pre-scheduled for deletion or update. Meanwhile, in Montecito, there were already signs that Meghan sensed something was brewing. Neighbors reported seeing increased black SUV traffic, more than the usual level of private security activity, and the sudden appearance of multiple legal advisors known to be associated with U.S. federal defense work. A former staffer, speaking anonymously, claimed Meghan had received a cryptic tip-off from a former royal employee urging her to get ahead of the story. Whether she tried to act on it is unknown. Back in London, the morning of the announcement was solemn. King Charles arrived at Buckingham Palace flanked not by aides, but by Princess and Prince William. They walked through the garden entrance, bypassing photographers entirely. The statement was finalized at 10:45 a.m. It was released at exactly 11 a.m. And just like that, decades of royal custom were shattered. Inside the walls of monarchy, an institution defined by endurance and restraint, a radical act of self-preservation had occurred. They had cut one of their own loose. Not in anger, but in defense of the crown. Not with cruelty, but with calculated certainty. As one senior royal advisor later said off the record, "We didn't burn the bridge. We simply acknowledged it no longer led anywhere." For the average observer, the phrase royal privilege evokes images of silk gloves, diamond tiaras, and carriages rolling across cobbled roads. But in modern reality, royal privilege, particularly in Meghan Markle's case, went far beyond pageantry and protocol. It was a quiet power, an invisible armor. And for Meghan, it had served as both shield and sword in a world where scrutiny was constant and stakes were brutally high. To understand the magnitude of what she lost, one must first understand what she had. When Meghan married Prince Harry in 2018, she didn't just become the Duchess of Sussex. She entered an ecosystem unlike any other, one built on centuries of ceremonial power, but governed by unwritten rules. The British monarchy, though largely symbolic in its political function, still operates with a global network of diplomatic courtesy, institutional reverence, and soft influence. Members of the royal family, whether working or not, are often afforded unspoken protections across borders, especially when it comes to matters of personal security, defamation, and legal exposure. And for Meghan, that net had been cast wide from the moment she walked down the aisle at St. George's Chapel. Though not a born citizen of the United Kingdom, Meghan was, through her marriage, extended the kind of informal diplomatic deference usually reserved for high-level state officials. This included, but was not limited to, simplified international travel processing, indirect shielding from litigation while abroad, exemption from certain customs declarations, and a delay in the progression of active legal matters tied to her personal and business history, all out of respect for the status she held as a senior royal consort. In legal terms, this wasn't immunity in the strictest sense. She was not above the law, but the law, out of custom and intergovernmental courtesy, often stepped aside. Investigations that might have been urgent for an ordinary citizen were moved to a non-priority queue. Civil claims involving defamation, fraud, or breach of contract were sometimes quietly discouraged or postponed by legal advisors who feared diplomatic embarrassment. This invisible barrier is what many have called the soft immunity of modern royalty. And Meghan, perhaps more than anyone in the royal orbit of the last century, had benefited from it, particularly during her transition from Duchess to American public figure. When she and Prince Harry announced their decision to step back from royal duties in early 2020, they issued a now-famous statement that they would work to become financially independent. What they didn't state, but what quietly remained, was that Meghan's past remained protected by association. Despite distancing themselves from royal responsibilities, the Sussexes retained their titles. And with those titles came the soft power of diplomacy. Legal scholars have noted that between 2020 and 2024, at least 5 separate cases, all filed or nearly filed in the United States, involving Meghan Markle or her affiliated entities were either dismissed, delayed, or quietly dropped due to uncertainty over jurisdiction and diplomatic status. One case, involving an alleged misrepresentation of charitable funds linked to a mental health campaign, was reportedly shelved after the U.S. Attorney's Office in California received a private communication citing ongoing diplomatic complexities. Another case involving identity inconsistencies on incorporation documents for a lifestyle brand allegedly tied to her name was rerouted into bureaucratic limbo, with the prosecutor stating off the record that No one wanted to open that can of worms while she was still technically covered. But none of this was ever publicly acknowledged. The press never got the memos. The people never saw the pauses. And that was the danger. Because unlike traditional forms of state immunity, which come with clear guidelines and expiration dates, Meghan's protections were nebulous. They weren't granted by law, but tolerated by custom. They existed in the gray, protected by royal silence, reinforced by diplomatic tact, and prolonged by governments fearful of igniting controversy with the British crown. This ambiguity allowed Meghan to exist in a liminal space, not quite royal, not quite private. Her charities functioned independently, but with royal flair. Her interviews were framed as personal, but constantly referenced the institution. Her ventures, from Spotify deals to Netflix contracts, were marketed on her post-royal identity, which, paradoxically, was built entirely on having once been inside. The monarchy, for a time, let this happen. Whether out of guilt, strategy, or fear of backlash, they did not move to formally sever ties. Even as Meghan and Harry critiqued the institution, released documentaries painting palace life as toxic, and pursued projects leveraging their titles, the crown remained largely silent. But silence does not last forever, especially not in institutions where image and law must eventually align. What triggered the end was not just a list of allegations. It was the realization, by King Charles and his closest advisors, that the crown's inaction was morphing into passive endorsement. That the palace, by failing to draw a line, was allowing its soft privilege to become Meghan's legal armor in ways that no longer served the monarchy nor the public trust. And so the decision was made to withdraw that privilege, not symbolically, but systemically. The announcement meant that any pending or paused legal actions involving Meghan Markle could now proceed without obstruction. Federal agencies in the United States, which had previously tiptoed around the diplomatic elephant in the room, were given quiet assurance that no intervention would come from the UK. Civil litigants who had been told their claims might endanger UK relations were told they could pursue their cases freely. And most dramatically, legal shields protecting certain aspects of Meghan's travel, business communications, and digital privacy under UK-linked protocols were formally lifted. In practice, this created a domino effect. Within hours of the announcement, federal offices in Washington and California received notice that their hands were no longer tied. One source inside the Department of Justice likened it to a green light we never thought we'd get. And they moved fast. Because for years, there had been files. Unopened files. Redacted files. Files marked, "Do not proceed," due to international sensitivity. Files that traced back to Meghan's pre-royal life. Involving businesses, foundations, and financial accounts that had been hard to access due to diplomatic courtesy. With immunity revoked, those files were no longer protected. What made this even more unprecedented was the timing. Legal experts were quick to point out that while soft immunity is often removed quietly, through expiration or informal messaging, it is almost never revoked publicly. Doing so not only exposes the individual, but also the institution that previously protected them. The palace had essentially confessed that it had sheltered Meghan, even if only through inaction. And now, in retracting that shelter, it opened itself to questions. Why had it waited? What had it known? And how deep did the privilege go? But behind closed doors, officials never stopped gathering evidence. From the Department of Justice, DOJ, to the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and even the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, units were quietly compiling dossiers on allegations linked to Meghan's activities over the last decade. One of the central focuses was her charitable foundation and associated ventures. While promoted as philanthropic efforts to empower women and children globally, investigators noted financial irregularities involving offshore accounts and undocumented transactions. According to sources familiar with the case, these accounts appeared to be funneled through jurisdictions with lax transparency laws, raising red flags about possible tax evasion or money laundering. In parallel, the FBI was examining claims that certain business entities tied to Meghan's brand were registered under false identities or using manipulated documentation. This kind of identity fraud, especially when linked to international business and financial transactions, carries severe penalties under federal law. What complicated matters further was Meghan's sophisticated media presence. Federal prosecutors reportedly reviewed evidence suggesting deliberate misinformation campaigns, possibly coordinated through media consultants and PR teams, aimed at influencing public perception and suppressing negative information. Though these investigations were far from complete, the formal legal actions were effectively on hold while Meghan retained royal immunity. Diplomatic channels and informal understandings between British and American authorities ensured that no direct charges would be pursued without the palace's consent or indication. The announcement from King Charles changed everything. Within minutes of the royal statement, U.S. agencies moved swiftly to lift any bureaucratic hesitations. Prosecutors and agents, previously constrained, were given the green light to proceed with subpoenas, asset freezes, and, ultimately, arrest warrants. Federal marshals and investigators coordinated to approach Meghan's California residence discreetly but decisively. Sources report that while the initial intention was to avoid public spectacle, the rapid spread of information made secrecy impossible. Further complicating the situation was Meghan's American citizenship. Unlike other royal family members who hold purely British nationality, Meghan's dual citizenship meant that the U.S. legal system had clear jurisdiction over many of the alleged offenses. This dual status gave U.S. authorities an unusual leverage point, one not typically available in cases involving foreign dignitaries. This legal leverage likely influenced the timing of the palace's announcement. Sources suggest a coordinated understanding. The monarchy's revocation of privilege would coincide with U.S. authorities activating warrants and legal processes. The synchronization was designed to demonstrate a united front of accountability, signaling that no individual, regardless of status, is beyond the reach of the law. However, the unfolding legal proceedings also opened new questions about privacy, media ethics, and the intersection of celebrity and justice. Meghan's supporters voiced concerns over what they described as a media witch hunt and alleged political motivations behind the investigations. Legal experts weighed in on the challenges ahead. Defending against federal charges, especially those involving financial crimes and identity fraud, requires meticulous legal strategy and often years of litigation. Meghan's legal team reportedly scrambled to prepare for a multi-jurisdictional battle, consulting with both British and American attorneys specializing in diplomatic law and white-collar crime. Despite these efforts, the momentum appeared firmly in favor of prosecutors. The withdrawal of royal privilege was seen as a game-changer, removing diplomatic obstacles that had previously shielded Meghan. As one former federal prosecutor explained, when immunity falls away, the full force of the law can be applied without hesitation. The legal storm unfolding in the U.S. added an unprecedented layer of complexity to the royal family's internal crisis. Not only was Meghan facing challenges from within the palace, but she was now entangled in a high-stakes battle with some of the most powerful legal institutions in the United States. This convergence of royal sanction and legal action has never been seen before in modern history. The implications reach far beyond Meghan herself. They touch on international relations, the boundaries of diplomatic protection, and the evolving role of the monarchy in a globalized world. As investigators continue their work, public attention has intensified. Media outlets broadcast every development, legal filings are analyzed in real time, and social media debates rage on. The American legal system, often viewed as unforgiving, now stands as the arena where Meghan Markle's fate may ultimately be decided. The moment the palace announcement hit the news wires, the world braced itself for what many had anticipated but few truly expected: the arrest of Meghan Markle. Far from the royal weddings, red carpets, and global philanthropic events that once defined her public persona, this event would be a stark, raw confrontation between law enforcement and one of the most scrutinized women in modern history. The scene was set in Montecito, California, an exclusive enclave known for its privacy, celebrity residence, and lush estates. It was here, behind gated walls and guarded entrances, that federal marshals arrived to execute the long-awaited warrant tied to allegations of financial and identity fraud. Witnesses described a swift, professional operation that unfolded in the early afternoon hours. Agents reportedly arrived in unmarked vehicles, blending into the quiet neighborhood, and approached Meghan's residence with clear purpose. The exact details of the arrest remain classified, but several credible sources paint a vivid picture of the proceedings. Contrary to some sensational media portrayals, the arrest was conducted without violence or physical confrontation. Meghan was reportedly cooperative but visibly shaken, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and resignation etched on her face. An eyewitness account from a nearby resident recalled seeing a woman matching Meghan's description escorted from the property, flanked by plainclothes officers, as a small convoy departed moments later. The operation's precision reflected months of careful planning between British and American authorities. Coordination ensured that the arrest would avoid unnecessary public disruption while signaling the seriousness of the charges involved. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. Within minutes, social media exploded with speculation, photos, and video snippets purportedly capturing the moment. Although official footage has yet to be released, the event dominated headlines worldwide, marking a historic moment where royal privilege met legal consequence in the most public of ways. Inside Meghan's legal team, the atmosphere was one of crisis management. Attorneys scrambled to prepare emergency filings, motioned to dismiss based on procedural grounds, and plans to contest the charges vigorously. Yet, the challenges ahead were formidable. The removal of royal immunity had stripped away any diplomatic safeguards, exposing Meghan fully to the jurisdiction of U.S. courts. The arrest also reignited fierce debate among royal watchers, political analysts, and the general public. Supporters framed the event as a miscarriage of justice, an example of systemic bias and the targeting of a woman who dared to break royal conventions. Critics, however, argued that it was a necessary step to uphold the rule of law and dismantle centuries-old shields that allowed the elite to evade accountability. The psychological impact on Meghan herself was profound. Close confidants suggest that the arrest represented a dramatic turning point, one that forced a reckoning with the consequences of past decisions and a future uncertain. For someone who had long controlled her narrative through media, memoirs, and public appearances, this moment stripped away layers of control. Beyond Meghan's personal ordeal, the arrest sent shockwaves through the royal family. King Charles, Prince William, and Princess Anne maintained a calculated silence in public, allowing legal processes to unfold without comment. Privately, sources say the family was grappling with the gravity of the situation, balancing the need for institutional preservation against the human cost. Prince Harry, still in the United States, faced an especially difficult position. Reports surfaced that he had made several attempts to intervene, including pleas for clemency and offers to cooperate with authorities, but with little success. His relationship with Meghan reportedly remained strained as the legal storm grew. Security concerns escalated as well. With the eyes of the world watching and passions running high on all sides, protective measures around Meghan's residence and court appearances were heightened. Authorities prepared for the potential of protests, media confrontations, and online harassment. The legal proceedings following the arrest are expected to be lengthy and complex. Charges involving identity fraud, financial misconduct, and related allegations carry significant penalties under U.S. law. The prosecution's case, bolstered by evidence previously shielded by diplomatic status, now aims to move forward with vigor. Meghan's defense is likely to challenge the evidence's validity, the motivations behind the investigations, and the timing of the palace's announcement. Legal experts caution that the high-profile nature of the case will influence both public perception and judicial processes, necessitating careful navigation by all parties. What is clear is that the arrest marks a turning point, not just for Meghan Markle, but for the British monarchy and its relationship with law, privilege, and public accountability. The once celebrated Duchess now stands at the center of a legal maelstrom that could redefine the boundaries of royal protection and personal responsibility in the 21st century. For Meghan, the fallout was immediate. Not only was she exposed legally, she was isolated diplomatically. The British embassies and consulates that once extended basic travel courtesies no longer returned calls. Invitations to high-level events suddenly disappeared. Partner organizations that once touted her Duchess title began removing her name from press materials. In the space of a day, the woman who had leveraged royal status as both armor and currency had become, in legal terms, a regular person again. And that was perhaps the most jarring part of all. Because without royal privilege, Meghan Markle was no longer Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, protected consort of a constitutional monarchy. She was Meghan Markle, private U.S. citizen, vulnerable to every court, every lawsuit, every subpoena, every camera lens. The psychological impact of this loss cannot be understated. Royal status, especially in the modern age, is not just ceremonial. It's a brand, a currency, a cloak that confers unspoken power. And for Meghan, who had so deftly woven that cloak into every part of her post-royal identity, its removal was more than symbolic. It was existential. No longer could she claim victimhood without scrutiny. No longer could she sign deals without vetting. No longer could she lean on the legacy of the crown without answering for the cost. This was not just a fall from favor. It was the collapse of a protective structure that had enabled her ascent. And in its place, nothing remained but the hard glare of the law and the questions that had waited too long to be asked. Every fall from grace has a moment, a single act or revelation that breaks the fragile balance between loyalty and law, protection and accountability. For Meghan Markle, that moment was not a sudden misstep, but the culmination of a series of actions and allegations that, when pieced together, formed a pattern too dangerous for the monarchy to ignore. This chapter delves into the alleged deeds that led to the unprecedented decision by King Charles, Prince William, and Princess and to revoke her royal protection, exposing her to full legal scrutiny. It began, according to multiple confidential sources, with intelligence reports that detailed financial inconsistencies and identity anomalies tied to Meghan's private and charitable ventures. Among the most alarming was the discovery of allegedly falsified documents used in registering a charitable foundation that bore her name. This foundation, touted publicly as a vehicle to empower women and children, reportedly funneled significant funds through offshore accounts in jurisdictions known for minimal financial transparency. The scale and complexity of these financial maneuvers reportedly caught the attention of international law enforcement agencies well before the Sussexes announced their exit from royal duties. However, the monarchy's informal shield delayed any official investigations, creating a blind spot that critics say Meghan exploited to expand her ventures without due oversight. Adding fuel to the fire were alleged communications intercepted between Meghan's close business associates and third-party media companies. These exchanges suggested a coordinated effort to manipulate public narratives, including staging interviews and controlling leaks to maximize personal brand growth. While media management is hardly unusual for celebrities, the degree of orchestration reportedly crossed into territory that raised ethical and legal red flags for palace advisors. Perhaps most consequential were allegations concerning identity fraud. Reports suggest that Meghan may have used multiple versions of personal identification, including variations of her birth certificate, passport details, and driver's licenses, to facilitate business transactions and travel arrangements. Some legal experts consulted by authorities argue that such discrepancies, if verified, constitute serious offenses under both British and American law. These allegations were not isolated whispers, but part of a sealed dossier compiled over several years by intelligence units with close ties to the crown. The dossier was periodically updated, growing thicker with new evidence from both public sources and confidential informants. It was this dossier that Princess and reportedly demanded be acted upon decisively during private discussions with King Charles and Prince William. In addition to financial and identity concerns, there were reports of interference with security protocols. Palace insiders revealed that Meghan allegedly attempted to bypass standard vetting procedures for personal staff and security details, insisting on trusted aides who had not undergone typical background checks. This created internal friction and suspicion, as it was perceived as an attempt to shield certain activities or individuals from palace oversight. Further complicating matters was Meghan's increasingly public criticism of the monarchy, which, while protected under free speech, reportedly strained her relationship with the crown and heightened scrutiny. Her interviews and statements, often laced with accusations of racism and institutional failure, were seen by some senior royals as damaging not only to the family's reputation, but also to its ability to manage ongoing legal and diplomatic challenges quietly. Prince William's role in the tipping point cannot be understated. Sources indicate that William was personally aggrieved by Meghan's actions, viewing them as betrayals of family trust and decorum. His private communications with the king reportedly expressed frustration over what he described as a pattern of reckless behavior that jeopardized the monarchy's stability. William's insistence on decisive action reportedly influenced Charles's ultimate decision to revoke Meghan's immunity. The final straw, according to insiders, was a confidential video recording that surfaced in late 2024. This recording allegedly captured Meghan engaging in discussions that suggested deliberate efforts to conceal financial irregularities and mislead legal authorities. While details of the video remain classified, its existence reportedly galvanized the palace to act swiftly and publicly. Taken together, these elements formed a narrative that painted Meghan Markle not just as a problematic royal, but as a figure whose actions potentially endangered the integrity of the monarchy itself. The decision to remove her protection was thus framed not as personal retribution, but as a necessary measure to uphold the institution's accountability. The repercussions of this decision have been immediate and far-reaching. U.S. authorities, once constrained by diplomatic considerations, have been empowered to pursue investigations with renewed vigor. Legal teams associated with Meghan face mounting pressure to respond to subpoenas and inquiries that were previously on hold. Public opinion remains divided. Supporters argue that Meghan is being unfairly targeted, a victim of institutional prejudice and family politics. Critics contend that her alleged misconduct justifies the unprecedented withdrawal of royal privilege and that no one is above the law, regardless of title. What remains clear is that Meghan Markle's story has shifted from one of celebrity and royalty to a legal and institutional reckoning. The Crown's action signals a new era where royal protection is no longer guaranteed, and where accountability takes precedence over privilege. The relationship between brothers is often one of the most complex bonds in the world, a mixture of rivalry, loyalty, love, and unspoken understanding. For Prince William and Prince Harry, that bond had long been tested by their shared childhood tragedies, divergent paths, and the intrusion of the public eye. But nothing tested it more than the fallout from Meghan Markle's actions and the resulting royal fallout. For years, William had watched his younger brother's life unravel under the intense glare of fame and controversy. Harry's decision to marry Meghan, step back from royal duties, and forge a new path in America was met with a blend of concern and quiet disappointment within the royal family. But it was William's hope that Harry would find peace and security beyond the palace walls, a hope that steadily eroded as scandals, lawsuits, and public disputes mounted. The decision to revoke Meghan's royal protection was as much William's as it was Charles's and Anne's. Sources close to the Duke of Cambridge reveal a simmering resentment that reached a boiling point in late 2024. William is said to have viewed Meghan's repeated legal and media battles as a direct attack on the family's honor and unity. The public airing of grievances, in his eyes, was reckless and damaging. Privately, William felt betrayed, not just by Meghan, but by Harry's steadfast defense of her. Despite the tensions, William had hoped for a reconciliation, a chance to repair the family's fractured bonds. But when the evidence against Meghan came to light, and the palace prepared to act, William made it clear that his patience had run out. In confidential conversations leaked to royal insiders, William is reported to have said, "We can no longer carry the burden of their choices. It's time to protect the institution, even if it means breaking family ties." This statement underscores a profound shift. William's role was no longer just that of a brother or son, but of a future king charged with safeguarding the monarchy's legacy. His focus had moved beyond personal relationships to the broader responsibility of protecting the crown for generations to come. The pain of this break was palpable. Harry, according to close sources, was blindsided by the announcement and by William's involvement. The royal rift widened further as Harry found himself increasingly isolated, both publicly and privately. William's anger was not just about family. It was about the message Meghan's actions sent to the world. He reportedly feared that the monarchy's reputation would be permanently tarnished if the crown continued to protect someone seen as manipulating its privileges. Moreover, William was deeply concerned about the impact on his own children. He wanted to ensure that George, Charlotte, and Louis grew up in a monarchy untainted by scandal, and that their legacy was not overshadowed by the controversies surrounding their uncle and his wife. While William maintained a stoic public demeanor, behind closed doors his frustration was raw. His refusal to intervene or advocate for Meghan's continued protection marked a definitive turning point in royal dynamics. This silence was deafening. It sent a clear signal that the future monarch prioritized the crown's integrity over familial bonds. For William, it was not about winning a personal feud, but about setting a precedent. No royal is above the law or the institution's principles. As the news of Meghan's revoked immunity spread, William's role in the decision became a focal point for media speculation. Analysts debated whether his stance was driven by personal animosity or genuine concern for the monarchy's future. Some sympathized with his position, viewing him as a protector of tradition. Others criticized him for what they saw as cold pragmatism. Regardless, William's final break was a moment of reckoning. A reminder that blood ties, no matter how strong, can be strained and even severed when duty calls. The path ahead for William is clear: to lead a monarchy in transition, balancing modernity with tradition, and to do so without the distractions of scandal. But the cost of that leadership, especially on his relationship with Harry, remains an open wound. In the saga of the British royal family, Princess Anne has often been described as the monarch's most steadfast and no-nonsense member. Quietly formidable, unafraid to speak her mind, and unwavering in her dedication to duty. Anne's role in the recent decision to revoke Meghan Markle's royal protection was pivotal and surprising to many outside royal circles. While much attention centered on King Charles and Prince William, it was Anne's voice that many insiders say helped tip the scales toward decisive action. Known affectionately within the palace as the Princess Royal, Anne has long held a reputation for placing duty above all else. Unlike some of her siblings, she has maintained a low profile but a high level of influence, especially when it comes to matters of protocol, security, and the preservation of the monarchy's integrity. Over the years, her work with charities, military engagements, and public service has earned her respect and trust among staff and officials alike. According to multiple sources, Princess Anne's involvement in the decision to strip Meghan Markle of her immunity was neither incidental nor ceremonial. Instead, she was reportedly the driving force behind the insistence that the monarchy could no longer allow perceived breaches of conduct to continue unchecked. In the weeks leading up to the announcement, Anne convened several closed-door meetings with senior palace officials, legal advisors, and even members of the security services. She voiced strong concerns that the palace's ongoing tolerance of Meghan's actions was damaging not only to the institution, but to the morale of those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to uphold its traditions. "And is a woman of principle," said a close aide. "She views the monarchy as a sacred trust, something bigger than any individual, bigger than family dramas or public opinion." To her, this was about preserving the crown's dignity. Her message to King Charles was reportedly firm. "If we don't act now," she told him in private, "we are complicit in allowing chaos to reign. The monarchy's future depends on accountability, and we must show that no one is above reproach." This resolve was crucial in breaking the hesitation that had plagued the king and others, who feared that acting against Meghan would provoke a public relations disaster or alienate Prince Harry irreparably. Anne's pragmatism, coupled with her long-standing respect within the institution, lent weight to the argument that protecting the monarchy's integrity outweighed potential fallout. Unlike the more public-facing members of the family, Anne's approach was direct and administrative. She is said to have personally overseen the drafting of the formal revocation notice, ensuring it left no room for ambiguity. Her involvement extended to coordinating with legal teams to prepare for the inevitable challenges and public scrutiny that would follow. Palace insiders also credit Anne with spearheading efforts to tighten internal protocols regarding the use of royal titles and privileges. She advocated for clearer guidelines to prevent future ambiguities, emphasizing that the crown's symbols and protections should never be taken lightly or used as personal shields. Her role was not without controversy. Some royal watchers speculated that Anne's hardline stance might deepen family divisions or alienate younger members who sympathized with Meghan and Harry. Others praised her courage, suggesting she embodied the monarchy's best traditions of duty and honor. Beyond the internal palace politics, Anne's firm hand sent a message to the public and the Commonwealth nations. The monarchy was committed to reform and accountability. It was a statement of principle, signaling that titles and protections were earned and could be withdrawn when standards were breached. This was a particularly striking development given Anne's long history of advocating for discipline and responsibility. She has been known to publicly reprimand aides or officials who stray from protocol, and her presence at royal engagements often underscores a seriousness that contrasts with the glamour and spectacle of other family members. In many ways, Anne's involvement reaffirmed the monarchy's enduring values amidst a period of turbulence and change. Her stance provided a counterbalance to the emotional complexities and media theatrics surrounding Meghan and Harry, focusing instead on institutional continuity and the rule of law. For Meghan Markle and her supporters, Anne's role may have seemed intimidating or even harsh. But within the palace, her actions were seen as necessary and inevitable. The message was clear: the monarchy will protect itself first, even if that means confronting difficult family dynamics. As the news of Meghan's revoked immunity spread, many commentators highlighted Anne's rising prominence behind the scenes. Some described her as the royal enforcer, a figure whose influence might shape the monarchy's future more than ever before. This newfound attention on and also raised questions about how the royal family balances tradition with modernization, public sympathy with accountability, and family loyalty with institutional preservation. Anne's actions have set a precedent, one that future generations of royals will likely be judged against. Her unwavering commitment to duty over sentiment signals a monarchy that, while evolving, remains fiercely protective of its core values. In the end, Princess Anne's voice was not just heard, it was decisive. She stood as a guardian of the monarchy's future at a moment when the institution needed clarity, courage, and conviction. While the British monarchy was quietly deliberating the fate of Meghan Markle's royal privileges behind palace walls across the Atlantic, a different kind of preparation was quietly underway. For years, various U.S. law enforcement and regulatory agencies had maintained open investigations into aspects of Meghan's financial dealings, identity verifications, and charitable activities. Yet, due to diplomatic protocol and the complexities of her royal status, many of these inquiries were stalled, delayed, or deprioritized, until the palace's announcement opened the door to full legal pursuit. Understanding the American response requires a look into how diplomatic immunity and soft protections affect investigations involving foreign dignitaries or individuals connected to them. While Meghan was not a government official in the United States, her status as a senior member of the British royal family effectively extended a degree of informal immunity. American agencies tread carefully, balancing the pursuit of justice with international diplomacy.